Dawn thinned the temple mist as bells trembled across the courtyard. The narrator watched Aiden Hart kneel before the assembly, his breath tight with doubt. Master Rowan Hale stepped forward, eyes calm as river stone. Master Rowan Hale said, "The path you follow has drifted from you." The words struck like a gong, and silence fractured around them. Aiden Hart said, "If I have strayed, then show me where my feet betray me." The air smelled of pine and ash, and the wind rifled prayer flags like restless thoughts. Master Rowan Hale said, "Look where you clutch, and you will see the rope that binds you." The monks bowed, yet the ground felt unsteady beneath Aiden. The narrator felt the world contract to two faces, one weathered and one raw. Aiden Hart said, "I will break the rope if you point to it." Master Rowan Hale said, "It breaks when you cease to pull." The bells faded, leaving a silence that hummed like a lesson waiting to be learned. The narrator followed Aiden into the cloister where shadows cooled the stone. His steps counted doubts instead of beats. Aiden Hart said, "If I am lost, then my map was pride drawn in ink that will not wash." The corridor breathed with incense and old wood sighs. He touched a crack in the wall and felt his own fault lines answering back. A novice passed and dipped his head like a quiet bell. Aiden Hart said, "Let me see the knot I tighten with every hope." Light pooled at an arch and dust rose like small prayers. The world held still, yet a tide moved under his ribs. Aiden Hart said, "I will sit where failure tastes plain and learn its salt." The narrator sensed a door within him, inching wider, not yet open, but listening. Master Rowan waited in the meditation hall, where tatami held the memory of many knees. He gestured, and Aiden sat, spine a wavering reed. Master Rowan Hale said, "Count the clutches, not the breaths." Aiden Hart said, "I clutch praise, control, and clean endings." The room accepted these words without echo. Master Rowan Hale said, "Hold none, and see what holds you." The kettle clicked, and a thin line of steam drew itself on the air. Aiden Hart said, "Then I will let the water speak." Silence widened until it felt like a shore. Master Rowan Hale said, "Begin again, and again is the first time." The narrator felt a thread loosen, almost too fine to notice. In the garden, wind combed the bamboo until murmurs braided into one voice. Liam Stone watched from the path with quiet worry. Liam Stone said, "You look like a bow strung too tight." Aiden Hart said, "Strings sing before they snap." Gravel crunched as he walked between moss islands. "Anigo." A sparrow landed and tilted its head at his storm. Aiden Hart said, "Master says the rope breaks when I stop pulling." Liam Stone said, "Then let your hands be open long enough to notice." The narrator saw his shoulders lower a finger's width. The bamboo hush answered like a teacher with no mouth. Night gathered like ink poured into water. Aiden lit a lantern and set it before the altar. The flame shaped his doubts into tiny dancers. "And me," Aiden Hart said, "I will not chase light. I will rest where darkness breathes." The lacquered wood reflected a wavering twin of his face. He bowed until his forehead found the mat and stayed there. A bell outside gave one soft note and faded. Aiden Hart said, "If the path has drifted, I will stand still until it finds me." The narrator felt the room grow vast, as if walls bowed outward. The wick fluttered once and steadied like a promise held lightly. Morning burned off the last of the mist, while Aiden walked the perimeter stones. The narrator noted how his breath hitched like a wheel with a bent spoke. Aiden Hart said, "If I am chasing worth, I will never touch it." A cicada started, and the sound felt like a wire pulled tight in his ribs. He paused at the gate where travelers once arrived with loud hearts. Aiden Hart said, "My mind keeps budgets of praise and debt." He remembered victories like lanterns that smoked the room instead of lighting it. Master Rowan Hale said, "Name a thing you refuse to lose." Aiden Hart said, "Control, and the story that forgives me." The wind pressed his robe to bone and showed him how thin a story can be. The narrator felt a shore inside him buckle under a private tide. In the refectory, benches waited like simple questions. Evan Pierce sat across with a city coat folded at his side. Evan Pierce said, "How many bowls of quiet equal a life well lived?" Aiden Hart said, "If I count, I miss the taste." Steam climbed from barley and drifted between them like a thought with no owner. Evan Pierce said, "Your piece looks like hiding from the scoreboard." The narrator watched Aiden's jaw set and soften in one breath. Aiden Hart said, "My score kept me poor when I looked richest." Evan Pierce said, "Then what buys your next hour?" Aiden Hart said, "Attention paid in full." The room held their words without choosing a side. Master Rowan waited by the bell tower where swallows stitched the air. Master Rowan Hale said, "Your task is simple and hard." Aiden Hart said, "Name it, and I will fail until I learn." Master Rowan Hale said, "Carry water from the spring and spill nothing of yourself." The narrator felt the riddle open like a gate with no hinges. Aiden Hart said, "I will carry the bucket and watch the one who carries me." They walked the path where roots asked each step for honesty. Master Rowan Hale said, "Return when the bucket is light and your heart is lighter." The bell gave a dry cough of metal and fell quiet. The silence agreed to keep the lesson. By the spring, Liam crouched with sleeves rolled. Liam Stone said, "Water shows the face you bring to it." Aiden dipped the bucket and watched his reflection wobble into honesty. Aiden Hart said, "I look like a verdict waiting on a judge." Liam Stone said, "Then retire the court." The narrator heard the creek argue gently with its own stones. Aiden lifted the bucket and kept his shoulders quiet. A droplet slid down, and he did not chase it. Aiden Hart said, "Let spills be teachers, not crimes." Liam Stone smiled the way moss smiles when you stop pressing it. Dusk thinned color from the courtyard, while Aiden crossed with careful steps. The bucket felt lighter than his thoughts for the first time. Evan Pierce watched from the eaves with a skeptical half-smile. Evan Pierce said, "So the trick is to walk slower." Aiden Hart said, "The trick is to stop making tricks." The narrator noticed how his gaze no longer hunted applause in nearby windows. Master Rowan Hale said, "What spilled today?" Aiden Hart said, "Only what wanted the ground." The bell did not ring, and the quiet took its place like a crown no one sees. He set the bucket down and did not need it to prove anything. The narrator watched the courtyard blaze with noon sun as Aiden staggered from meditation. His robe clung with sweat, yet his eyes searched for peace. Master Rowan Hale said, "What did silence reveal?" Aiden Hart said, "Only noise in finer clothes." He felt shame crawl across his ribs. Evan Pierce leaned at the gate and smirked like a skeptic with proof. Evan Pierce said, "Your quiet is only dressed-up panic." The words struck, and Aiden's breath cracked like thin glass. Master Rowan Hale said, "Fail again until you see the one failing vanish." The cicadas drilled the air like restless thoughts. Aiden Hart said, "I am breaking, and the pieces will not arrange." The meditation hall breathed incense while shadows swam across the tatami. Aiden knelt, body trembling from effort. Master Rowan Hale said, "Sit until the walls no longer lean on you." Aiden Hart said, "The walls crush me like debts unpaid." He clenched his fists and nails bit skin. The narrator felt the air thicken, as if the room shared his torment. Liam Stone whispered, "Even pain bows if you stop chasing escape." Aiden Hart said, "My escape runs faster than I can crawl." The kettle hissed in agreement. Master Rowan Hale said, "Let collapse be the lesson." The silence pressed harder than stone. At twilight, the garden paths filled with restless wind. Evan Pierce followed Aiden with sharp words like thrown stones. Evan Pierce said, "Your master feeds you riddles, not truth." Aiden Hart said, "Truth cuts deeper than riddles if I dare touch it." The narrator sensed both men carried storms. Evan Pierce said, "You hide from the world behind robes." Aiden Hart said, "And you hide behind noise." Their steps tangled on gravel that hissed beneath them. Liam Stone watched from distance, silent as bamboo bending. Aiden Hart said, "If silence kills me, then at least I meet death awake." Night lanterns painted the cloister gold, while Aiden carried the bucket again. His arms shook with each step. Master Rowan Hale said, "Spill, and notice who is ashamed." Aiden Hart said, "Every drop feels like failure." The bucket trembled, and water leapt to the stones. Evan Pierce said, "See, even water refuses you." Aiden bit back rage, his teeth gritted like locked gates. The narrator felt the air turn sharp with his fury. Liam Stone said, "Spills are not betrayal. They are proof of journey." Aiden Hart said, "Then why does shame burn brighter than fire?" Silence answered, heavier than iron. The narrator watched the meditation hall by candlelight where Aiden collapsed on the mat. His breath tore like fabric. Aiden Hart said, "I cannot mend the crack." Master Rowan Hale said, "Cracks let the sky inside." A tear slid down his cheek and caught the flame. Evan Pierce turned away, unable to look. Liam Stone pressed a hand on Aiden's shoulder like moss holding stone. Aiden Hart said, "If I shatter, let it be in silence." The bell gave one hollow note, as if answering. The hall swelled with stillness that carried both despair and promise in one breath. The narrator watched dawn stain the mountains in pale fire. Aiden walked alone near the cliff edge where mist rose like questions without answers. Master Rowan Hale said, "The rope you pull has frayed to thread." Aiden Hart said, "I have knotted it until my hands bleed." The wind pressed his robe tight, and his heart rattled like a lantern in a storm. Evan Pierce followed with words sharp as gravel. Evan Pierce said, "Your enlightenment is a mirage on stone." Aiden Hart said, "Then I must learn to drink mirages." Silence stretched, and the cliff seemed to wait for a step not yet taken. By midday, the silent witness stood at the temple gate, eyes calm as still water. The narrator felt his presence bend the air with quiet weight. Aiden paused, unsettled by the gaze that asked nothing yet revealed much. Aiden Hart said, "You say nothing, but my chest trembles." The silent witness did not answer, his silence sharper than words. Evan Pierce muttered, "Even statues speak more than him." Aiden lowered his head, caught between fear and reverence. The stillness pressed until he saw himself reflected in it. He whispered, "I am loud enough to drown myself." Evening gathered shadows in the inner garden where lanterns waited to be lit. Liam Stone knelt, hands brushing moss as if it carried secrets. He looked at Aiden and said, "You chase storms but refuse clear skies." Aiden Hart said, "Peace feels like exile when I burn inside." Evan Pierce snapped, "Your fire is smoke choking you." The narrator felt the three men orbit one another, bound by silence more than words. Liam Stone said, "Every scar can teach, if you let it breathe." Aiden's shoulders sagged as though old chains pressed them. The catalyst appeared that night by the shrine, a stranger cloaked in travel dust. The narrator saw his eyes burn with riddles. The catalyst said, "A bird sings only when the cage is gone, yet you polish the bars." Aiden Hart said, "Who are you to speak of cages?" The catalyst said, "One who vanishes before dawn, leaving only echoes." Evan Pierce scoffed, "Another ghost selling riddles." The flame bent in the wind, as if agreeing. Aiden Hart whispered, "If my cage breaks, will I sing or fall silent?" The stranger only smiled. Past midnight, Aiden dreamt of the shadow by the river's edge. The narrator described the figure rising like smoke from water, shaped like his own younger self. The shadow said, "You left me buried in silence." Aiden Hart said, "I could not carry you and live." The figure's eyes gleamed with grief unspoken. The river hissed against stones like memory breaking. Aiden's chest cracked open with old shame. He whispered, "Forgive me for turning away." The shadow said, "Forgive yourself," and I fade. Dawn neared as the dream dissolved into pale light. The narrator saw dawn's pale fire cut through the temple hall as Aiden trembled in meditation. His breath shuddered like rope ready to snap. Master Rowan Hale said, "Let it break." Aiden Hart said, "If I shatter, I will be nothing." The silence groaned around his fear. Liam Stone whispered, "Nothing is the gate you fear to open." Evan Pierce muttered, "Better to stay whole than vanish." Aiden's hands gripped his knees until blood faded from his knuckles. He said, "I am not whole. I am splinters." The bell outside struck, its echo shaking loose a tear that fell before he knew it. The narrator followed Aiden as he staggered into the garden where wind rattled bamboo like bones. He dropped to his knees, chest heaving. Aiden Hart said, "I surrender." The words tore out raw, louder than prayer. The sky shifted as if listening. Master Rowan Hale appeared, steady as stone, and said, "When rope burns away, hands are free." Aiden bowed forward until his forehead touched gravel. Evan Pierce turned aside, eyes narrowing with unease. Liam Stone's gaze softened with tears unfallen. The world itself seemed to exhale with him. The narrator felt the first quiet after storm. Beside the spring, Aiden lifted water in his hands and let it slip through. The narrator said the stream gleamed brighter than before. Aiden Hart whispered, "Nothing is kept, nothing is lost." Master Rowan Hale said, "The bucket is never yours, nor the river." Liam Stone knelt and smiled faintly, as if learning again himself. Evan Pierce stepped closer, frown loosening as he watched. The current hummed against stones like a mantra of release. Aiden's shoulders lifted, no longer bowed. He whispered, "I was never broken, only clinging to perfection." The forest wind echoed his surrender. In the cloister, Aiden walked slower, lantern light brushing his face. The narrator felt the calm grow like dawn across stone. Evan Pierce stepped from shadow, voice softer than before. Evan Pierce said, "What if your piece is just another costume?" Aiden Hart said, "If it is, then I wear it until it falls away." The words did not bite, but eased like water through soil. Evan Pierce's arms dropped, his defiance thinning. Liam Stone said, "Not all silence is disguise." Master Rowan Hale only watched, eyes deep with unspoken knowing. Aiden's steps carried no weight now. Night fell deep, and the narrator saw Aiden seated beneath the great cedar. Stars blinked between branches like eyes awake. He closed his eyes and said, "I am not chasing the sky. I am within it." Master Rowan Hale placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Now you begin." Evan Pierce stood farther off, arms loose, doubt dimming. Liam Stone sat quietly nearby, face turned upward with peace. The wind sighed through cedar leaves like a final hymn. Aiden's chest no longer carried storms. The world for one breath felt whole. The narrator found morning stretched thin over the roofs, and the air felt rinsed clean. Aiden walked the inner path without counting steps. Master Rowan Hale said, "Do nothing extra." Aiden Hart said, "Doing less still feels like effort." The wind loosened a prayer flag, and its flutter did not ask to be seen. Liam Stone said, "Peace is the work that works on you." A bellbird called once, and left the space open. Evan Pierce lingered near the gate, his eyes softer than doubt, but not yet trust. Evan Pierce said, "If you are changed, let the day prove it." Aiden Hart said, "I will let the day walk me." The narrator noticed how his shoulders no longer begged for praise. The corridor accepted his passing like water accepts a boat. In the refectory, bowls steamed and benches hummed with quiet chores. The narrator watched Aiden serve last and sit without reaching for words. Evan Pierce said, "Silence used to feel like a trip." Aiden Hart said, "Now it feels like a room with open doors." The steam folded between them like a gentle curtain. Master Rowan Hale said, "Eat what comes, refuse nothing, hoard nothing." Liam Stone laughed softly, not at anyone but with the soup itself. Evan Pierce said, I have chased clocks and they never stop for me. Aiden Hart said, then stop for them. The wood table held their reflections in dim varnish. The hour passed without asking to be measured. At the spring, the water spoke in silver syllables, against stone. The narrator saw Aiden kneel and let his hands fill and empty without claim. Master Rowan Hale said, your task returns each day as if new. Aiden Hart said, I meet it as if I never met it before. Liam Stone said, beginner's eyes are hard to keep. Evan Pierce stepped closer, his posture unarmored for once. Evan Pierce said, what if I have built my house from noise? Aiden Hart said, then listen until the walls answer. The forest wind stitched light to shadow and made no promise. A swallow skimmed the pool, and nothing needed applause. The narrator followed them to the training yard, where stones warmed under late sun. Aiden carried the bucket, but his gait wrote ease instead of strain. Master Rowan Hale said, let the weight travel through you. Aiden Hart said, it passes like weather. Evan Pierce paced beside him, as if learning a forgotten step. Evan Pierce said, if I let go, what holds me? Liam Stone said, the ground you stopped ignoring. A droplet slid and fell, and no shame climbed after it. Aiden Hart said, loss is a visitor, not a verdict. The yard opened wide as if to agree, and the day kept breathing. Dusk poured indigo into the cedar grove while lanterns kindled one by one. The narrator felt a hush arrive that did not demand attention. Aiden sat beneath the branches and watched thoughts float by like slow fish. Master Rowan Hale said, nothing to push, nothing to hold. Aiden Hart said, even the wanting to want is fading. Evan Pierce stood at the edge, the old armor loosening into breath. Evan Pierce said, teach me where to start. Aiden Hart said, start at the breath that is already here. Liam Stone smiled and closed his eyes as if answering a friend. The night gathered them without choosing favorites, and peace did not brag. The narrator saw dawn break across the valley in a hush of gold. Aiden walked slowly along the outer wall, his steps unmeasured yet sure. Master Rowan Hale said, the path continues, though you no longer chase it. Aiden Hart said, I walk not to arrive, but to be walked. Evan Pierce leaned nearby, his silence louder than old arguments. Liam Stone bowed his head as if bowing to the day itself. The wind scattered petals across stone like scattered prayers. Aiden lifted one petal in his palm and let it drift away. He whispered, nothing is mine, yet all is here. By mid-morning the refectory filled with clatter softened by laughter. The narrator noted how Aiden sat without reaching for words, content among silence and sound. Evan Pierce said, the noise feels different now. Aiden Hart said, noise is only silence shaped by hands. Liam Stone laughed, his bowl tipped slightly, catching sun. Master Rowan Hale said, both noise and silence are teachers, if you stop naming them enemies. Aiden lifted his spoon without hurry. The broth steamed like a soft answer to an unasked question. The air smelled of barley and cedar, and even time seemed willing to pause. At the spring, Aiden bent and saw his reflection ripple without judgment. The narrator said the water shimmered like glass forgiving its cracks. Aiden Hart whispered, this face is no longer a verdict. Master Rowan Hale said, when the mirror stops accusing, you are ready to look. Evan Pierce crouched, eyes softened by the same ripples. Evan Pierce said, I do not know if I can forgive myself. Aiden Hart said, the river forgave before you asked. Liam Stone dipped his hand and let droplets fall back. The forest answered with nothing but stillness, which was enough. The narrator followed them to the garden where bamboo bent beneath a playful wind. Evan Pierce walked slowly, his stride no longer sharpened by defiance. He said, maybe peace is not empty after all. Aiden Hart said, peace is full enough to hold your emptiness. Liam Stone smiled, brushing gravel with a rake that sang in soft arcs. Master Rowan Hale watched the scene with eyes that carried centuries of dawns. Aiden touched a bamboo stalk and said, "Even bending can be strength." The air agreed, rustling leaves into applause that no one claimed. The moment lingered without asking for more. At sunset, the narrator stood with Aiden atop the cliff where the valley opened wide. The horizon burned orange, fading into violet, and silence wrapped all. Aiden breathed slow, his chest no longer storming. He whispered, "I am not lost. I am here." Master Rowan Hale rested beside him with a gaze like twilight itself. Liam Stone knelt at the edge, hands folded in quiet prayer. Evan Pierce stood farther back, face turned toward the horizon as if seeing home for the first time. The wind curled through robes and carried the final note of the day. Nothing else was needed.